surrendering to the Manhattan District Attorney's Office this morning. In court, prosecutors described a 15-year tax scheme charging Weisselberg, Trump Payroll Corporation, and the Trump Organization. Overall, 15 felony counts, including conspiracy and grand larceny. Prosecutors allege Weisselberg evaded taxes on $1.7 million in compensation. All three defendants pleaded not guilty. Weisselberg's attorney announcing in a statement he will fight the charges. His indictment and charges against the Trump Organization come after a more than 2-year probe by the Manhattan DA, Cy Vance. An investigation which was originally triggered by questions surrounding hush money payments made by Donald Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to adult film star Stormy Daniels, and ultimately led to obtaining Trump's tax records in a Supreme Court battle. Investigators have been focusing on perks awarded to employees, like free apartments, cars, and even school tuition. Benefits that would amount to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and were allegedly not properly reported for tax purposes.
When you get the same salary for 21 years and the same bonus, and then the raise is paid in an apartment, in a car, in a tuition, that's the issue.
Alan, how are you feeling?
The Trump Organization fired back today, claiming prosecutors are using Weisselberg, quote, as a pawn in a scorched earth attempt to harm the former president. Saying in a statement, the district attorney is bringing a criminal prosecution involving employee benefits that neither the IRS nor any other district attorney would ever think of bringing. This is not justice, this is politics. Lawyers for the Trump Organization spoke after court.
If the name of the company was something else, I don't think these charges would have been brought.
Former President Trump released a statement calling today's charges a political witch hunt brought by radical left Democrats. He suggested that these charges are dividing the country like never before. Now, at this point, there's no indication the former president will be charged, but we know from our sources that this investigation is active and ongoing, and today's charges increase the pressure on Weisselberg to cooperate against the former president. Jake.
All right, Paul, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Joining us now to discuss and much more, Adam Sower. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic. He's the author of a brand new book, The Cruelty is the Point, The Past, Present, and Future of Trump's America, available now. Congratulations, Adam. I wanted to ask you, you heard Paula talking about how Trump is calling this a witch hunt. Also, there's a new statement. I don't tend to quote his frequent press releases, but he just tweeted, or emailed rather, do people see the radical left prosecutors and what they're trying to do to 75 million plus voters and patriots for what it is? In other words, they're going after me, but they're not really going after me. They're going after you, to his supporters. How explain how that fits in with what you write about in your book.
Well, Trump has always presented himself as both a champion and avatar of his voters, and so that any attack on him personally or personal political difficulty is actually an attack on his base. And that's part of how he cultivates among his most ardent supporters a sense of persecution, and that, you know, the rival party does not simply want to beat them in elections, but wants to destroy them and annihilate their way of life. And that sort of apocalyptic rhetoric is really a big part of how Donald Trump he cultivates his appeal and energy among a particular subset of his voters.
And you write in your book that Trump understood Republican voters better than the Republican establishment in Washington in 2015, 2016, which is really an interesting thing to say, because there obviously were a lot of people, professional class Republicans, who never thought Donald Trump would get far. And your point is that Trump understood the voters that these people had been cultivating for years far better than they did.
He did, because Trump was a vociferous consumer of Fox News. And one of the things he did was he watched Fox News and he reflected the sort of current of whatever the current fashion of fear-mongering was prominent on Fox News, he would reflect that back to his audience. And in doing that, he would validate the fears that they were having as a result of what they were watching on Fox News. And this created a kind of connection and intimacy between him and his audience, because they were having their fears and hopes validated in a way that other politicians might not have been willing to do, precisely because of the tone of coverage on the network, even though obviously a lot of Republicans go on that network. But Donald Trump was really willing to go all in on those kinds of ideas and fears and conspiracies that the base had already embraced, but that other mainstream Republican politicians would not necessarily talk about in that particular tone.
And one of the other things that you write about that I thought was so interesting was we've all been talking about since 2016 the similarity in a very superficial way, but the similarity in talking about the system being rigged that Bernie Sanders would talk about, and also Donald Trump. There was some overlap in 2016. Obviously, it's very different. Explain the difference in your view between the system being rigged that Bernie Sanders talks about and the system being rigged that Donald Trump talks about.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways these are unfairly conflated because they're a reflection of two very different ideological lenses. And you sometimes saw people talk about Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump in the same breath that year, and I really don't think that they're comparable. And I don't think that they're comparable because essentially Bernie Sanders was saying there is an unfair economic system in America and we need to change the system. And what Donald Trump was saying is that there's a group of people in America who are also Americans and they're your enemies, and we need to destroy them in order to make life better for you because they're the ones who are ruining your way of life and who want to destroy you. And I think those are two very different ideological lenses. And, it's not that people's grievances aren't legitimate, but just because your grievance is legitimate, just because you are legitimately struggling with something, doesn't mean that whatever you do in response to that suffering is legitimate. So I would regard them as distinct because they were actually talking about two different kinds of rigged systems, despite using the same phrase sometimes.
You talk a lot in your book about the role that you view racism played in the surge of Trump and his popularity. I want to play for our viewers two moments, decades apart, that you mentioned in your book. The first is Donald Trump reacting to David Duke's win in Louisiana in 1991 when he won the Republican primary. The second clip is 2016 after David Duke endorsed him for president. So let's watch these two clips.
It's an anger vote. People are angry about what's happened. People are angry about the jobs. If you look at Louisiana, they're really in deep trouble.
Well, just so you understand, I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists.
You talk a lot in your book. You write a lot about America's collective amnesia on race. Explain.
Well, I mean, Donald Trump, he actually went further than that. He said that he thought David Duke might actually do well in a Republican presidential primary, that he was very similar to Pat Buchanan, although Pat Buchanan was a more polished package, and that Pat Buchanan was going to give the president at the time, George H.W. Bush, a run for his money. So when Donald Trump in 2016 was pretending not to know who David Duke was, what he was actually he was actually quite aware of who David Duke was. He saw his campaign and how it appealed to Republican voters, and he deliberately lied about his knowledge of that because he didn't want to be associated with a campaign that he knew he would be associated with if you compared the two. And I think it's kind of awesome that you found that clip. But I think the reaction to David Duke's candidacy was actually quite similar. I mean, what Donald Trump said, this is obviously an economic issue. It's about jobs. But there were a lot of black people in Louisiana who were struggling very hard at that time economically, and they voted en masse against David Duke. And David Duke got a lot of votes in the wealthy suburbs in Louisiana as well. So there was a kind of deliberate attempt to place a simplified economic frame on the issue without considering, how ideology would force people to interpret their own economic misfortune.
Adam, congratulations on the book. Whether